I'd like to first welcome everyone and introduce Megan Enright, Executive Director of Love City Strong. Megan, would you like to kick it off?
Thanks, Margaret. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time tonight to join us. By now, I hope that most of you are familiar with Love City Strong and our mission to serve St. John in the areas of disaster preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. If you're not familiar, I'm Megan Enright. As Margaret said, I'm the director of Love City Strong. And it was in the spirit of community resilience that we embarked upon this Plan Cruz Bay project last year. We were hopeful that we could bring the community together to envision a resilient, sustainable, and really culturally rooted Cruz Bay, while advocating for the redevelopment of underutilized and underused government properties to serve local residents' needs. The result of the design charrette last June is the report that will be presented tonight. And I really think that it is a beautiful example of a living document for the community, an example of what's possible when St. John comes together and speaks with one voice about what we want to see in the future. More than 300 St. John residents participated in the charrette, and I believe that there are really great examples of the various visions of what a resident-centering, resilient Cruz Bay looks like. Of course, we all know that change is inevitable, but I believe that a cohesive plan like this one can really help allow Cruz Bay to continue to adapt in a way that prioritizes community needs first and foremost. I'll turn it over to the team to talk more about the plan.
Thank you, Megan. That was a wonderful introduction and very encouraging and inspiring for the upcoming presentation of the plan report. What we're going to be doing this evening, first of all, let me just introduce myself. My name is Margaret Flippen, and I'm a planner with Dover, Cole & Partners. We're a town planning and urban design firm. And along with myself is my colleague and firm principal, Amy Groves. And you'll be hearing from both of us this evening, as well as cultural advisor Kurt Marsh, and the folks at the Horsley Witten Group, John Ford, Ellen Beigert, and Nate Kelly. And they'll be sharing with us some strategies with regards to resiliency and recovery and infrastructure. So we're honored to be a part of Plan Cruz Bay and to be partnering with you all as the community. As Megan said, when we started this project, the focus of creating a near and long-term dynamic strategy. And I like what Megan said with regards to the report being a living document. I'm excited to share the report with you all tonight. And I also encourage you, the entire report is available on plancruzbay.com for you to view, to download, skim through, take a deep dive, as well as I also want to remind everyone as we get going that if you have questions that come to mind as we're presenting, please feel free to use the Q&A, which is on your Zoom screen, as well as the chat function, and you can chat directly with us or ask us questions, and we'll also be answering those questions at the end of the presentation. The study area for Plan Cruz Bay focuses on the historic center of the community in the historic district. So we're looking at the area along the bay from the ferry all the way towards Veterans Circle and the library, as well as the area connecting down to the future Port Authority Park, as well as the area closer to the creek and the battery. So that's sort of an overview of the area that we've been looking at and studying. And as part of that, we've been doing a lot of analysis with regards to the lay of the land. So understanding some unique natural features of Cruz Bay with the hillsides, with the topography, with the way water flows down towards the bay. And so as you can see on this map, we were looking at the brightest yellow and orange were the highest points in the area. And so you can see the bulk of the town is in the lighter blue, and that's lower towards the coastline. And so these were important things when we're looking at resiliency and recovery and taking into consideration a lot of the environmental and climate factors as we're looking towards near and long-term improvements. I also find that maps like this are important because when we started this process with Love City Strong and with the St. John community, we were working on basically a blank sheet of paper. And when I say a blank sheet of paper, it means it was base information of what exists today. So we did not we were looking for input from the community to create and shape the plan, but starting with looking at an analysis of the overall area, looking at historic data, historic images, and really understanding a picture of where Cruz Bay has been and where it's going, and how to focus on what we heard so much with regards to preserving and maintaining community character and the importance of culture in the area. As Megan said, the other essential component as far as coming together is also creating one voice for the future of Cruz Bay. And that's something that I feel has been extremely special and important. The hands-on design process was especially rewarding, and we're grateful for everyone who's participated. This is another example of sort of this blank sheet of paper map where it shows buildings and streets. It does not show plan recommendations, but what it does show is property ownership. And one thing we noticed as planners and designers, when we were looking at these maps, they're sort of x-rays of your town. One thing we saw was the amount of government property in Cruz Bay, and sort of looking together to see in the future as some of these properties are rethought or as they continue recovery efforts, what the community would like to see for these spaces. It also includes looking at public spaces like streets or Powell Park or the government-owned battery land, and just thinking about for the future, how can Cruz Bay continue to provide the unique cultural and sense of community that so many residents treasure? Has this been done before in the islands? It has, actually. In 2010, Dover Cullen Partners was part of the town's blueprint for Charlotte Amalie. And I wanted to share this experience because it was very similar actually to the Cruz Bay experience, where residents came together, rolled up their sleeves, worked on different maps, and were able to shape a vision and blueprint for the future of the town. So with that came a lot of drawings and illustrations and sort of understanding, taking words and getting them into drawings and vision documents. And then from there, the the town's blueprint was actually adopted by executive order by the governor. And by doing that, it sort of synthesized the voice of the community to move forward with government assistance and direction towards implementation. And so what you see today from this initial planning effort and from the community coming together and saying, we want to improve the area along the waterfront, the area in the historic district in town. And what you see is a repurposed and a enhanced Veterans Drive with more access to the waterfront and an incredible public space for folks to walk and visit and congregate with neighbors and friends along the waterfront. So we like to share this example because sometimes things do take some time to happen, but by having a plan in place, it shows that the community is driven and they're driven together towards a common vision to implement what they would like to see for the future of their town. Now, creating the plan. So as I mentioned, we were looking at analysis maps and we sort of had a blank sheet of paper. Well, last June, we all came together in a design charrette, and it was really an incredible experience where we were working on site together for a week and just coming together and sharing ideas. And it was very rewarding and meaningful. We had a variety of events at different times of day, and really wanting as many people to participate and touch the plan as possible. So as Megan said, we had over 300 residents stopping by, visiting with us, sharing their ideas and sharing their input. And it was a really wonderful experience because as we got to know friends in the community, we also began to see similar ideas starting to emerge. And that's where we as planners and technicians can start to synthesize those ideas to create an overall plan. But those ideas that you'll see in tonight's plan report came directly from the community. We started with a wonderful walking tour, thanks to Kurt and the folks that joined us that Sunday evening, really walking up and down the streets, especially in the historic district, and looking at the built environment, looking at what works, what doesn't work, maybe what used to be, or maybe things that need to be changed for different. There was a large group of us walking through town, and it was very wonderful to see just the true character of the place and to walk together and share ideas and conversation. On Monday evening, we gathered at the school, and for this event, we were gathered in small groups and we worked with maps, sharing and drawing ideas, writing down ideas, just having conversation. In this event, it was loud, it was fun, it was just a great opportunity to come together. And as the evening went on, as I was mentioning, you start to see similar themes and ideas emerge. And at the end of the evening, a representative from each table presented their ideas to the overall assembly. And what was wonderful was, the first table would say, let's make streets more walkable. And then the next table is like, hey, that's our idea. So it was really wonderful to start to see the community realizing that they likely had more ideas in common than they may have realized. We also did some quick surveys, one word that describes Cruz Bay today, and these are just really great because they popped up on the screen, and these were just words that people typed in: congested, run down, not walkable, and then opportunities for what you would like to see in the future: walkable, accessible, community, sustainable. And the words that are larger were words that were more repeated by multiple entries. So we like to take all of this input, as well as the conversations and as well as the community enthusiasm, and to shape these various ideas and technical advice into plans. And those plans can help with near as well as long-term improvements. So one area in particular that's of interest is the school property and what would be happening to that in the future. We look back at historic images and even images from the past 20 years with the ball field, and just how the area has evolved and grown and changed over time, and what the community would like to see. And it was really interesting to see primarily the community, and the input that you all shared was focused on creating more spaces for civic functions, whether it's government functions or community gatherings. But it was really wonderful to see, with the amount of government property in Cruz Bay, the many opportunities that are available in town. We also looked at a lot of things with regards to accessibility and the way people travel through town. This was an example of just with some of the table groups presenting, and Kurt was assisting that evening as well, sharing his wealth of knowledge. And it was a wonderful gathering of the community coming together. So after that evening, we set up an on-site design studio, and many of you, I hope, saw us at Maida's Plaza right next to the post office. It was an open door. People were able to walk in and just share ideas and conversation with us. We also had a series of technical meetings where we were inviting folks in from whether it was housing or historic preservation, infrastructure, the Port Authority, and really looking at these various plan ideas. And so the plan was being created on site in Cruz Bay. And so we really like the involvement. It was absolutely, we've probably done over 200 of these processes across the country. And the response we got from Cruz Bay was just incredible and inspiring and encouraging. And it by far was just outstanding in our eyes. It was also really wonderful with it being June. There was a lot of summer camps. And so folks came from the Boys and Girls Club, as well as from the school and the School of the Arts. And so it was just really wonderful because the youth really are the future. And this plan, as Megan said, it is sort of a working document of sorts, but it really is to plan for this generation and the next. And so it was really wonderful to hear ideas from the children. It was lovely. We also had participation from the governor's office, and so we appreciate Governor Bryan and Lieutenant Governor coming by as well. And it was just nice for them to be able to see the plan unfolding and evolving right there in real time, with the community lending a hand and sharing ideas. And the school children were extremely excited and grateful to meet the governor as well, which was very special. We continued on Tuesday through Thursday, working in the design studio. And basically during that, we would start to sketch out ideas and pin them up and make sure that we were on the right track. So that's how we like working on site, so we know that we're headed the right direction. We also had some poster boards outside where people could write down their ideas. It was a really, I hope that you all on the conversation this evening enjoyed it as much as we did. A visit to the senior center to hear stories from the past and how the seniors have seen Cruz Bay evolve over time. And then technical meetings, as I was mentioning, with local experts and technicians. That was very helpful as well. We concluded the week with a work in progress presentation back at the school. And that's where we basically shared the common themes and the ideas that we had been hearing from the week. And we asked at the end, is the plan on the right track? And there was an overwhelming majority that said yes, or probably yes. And so that was encouraging to us to take that charge and move forward with creating the plan document that you're going to see this evening. So from those ideas, what we found was a series of common themes started to emerge. And so we summarized those, and these are the key ones that we felt were essential to the near and the long-term evolution of Cruz Bay: focusing on culture, making streets walkable public places, improving all forms of mobility, redevelopment government property to serve community needs, and create a restorative, resilient Cruz Bay town. And what I think is really interesting with each of these is they really have a lot of overlap, and it's not just a single common theme. It really is a package of themes that can involve all sorts of different components. And so what we've laid out is this synthesis map that starts to take those themes and actually tie them to places. And so how those words can start to move towards action and implementation. So this was the synthesis map where we were combining the various ideas, and all of these images are available on plancruzbay.com, so you can take a closer look. But looking at improving connections, pedestrian access, green space, connecting spaces for the community, looking at mixed use opportunities, especially in the area around the school, and connecting the library. We also talked a lot, and we'll be sharing this evening as well. John Ford from our team will be talking about the transportation components, especially with regards to the passenger ferry locations. So from the synthesis map, this was sort of getting back into our x-rays and our analysis maps. This is the existing conditions. And what we did was we took the various ideas that we heard and the common themes, and we created an illustrative plan. And this is the type of plan that's helpful to understand how new buildings can fit in with the existing framework. And what you'll see from this is it's primarily adding green and green spaces and trees and native vegetation. But in opportunities where there are potential for additional buildings, like for instance, as the school site is redeveloped, we did illustrate what those would look like, the area around the port property at the creek, as well as the area along the library. So the buildings you see there in sort of the rosy pink color, those would be new buildings. And then the green would show open space, park space, and trees. And then the sort of the sand color brown would be looking at improved pedestrian connections throughout Cruz Bay. So the common themes, what we'd like to do now is sort of walk through each of those that I mentioned, and we're going to start with historic preservation and culture. And so we're going to walk through those, and I want you to keep in mind as we're going through them that each one has a series of getting there steps. So it talks about the theme, but it also talks about the strategies to make those themes a reality. So I'd like to turn it over to Kurt Marsh, and he's going to walk through our first common theme with us.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? Really excited to be here and to discuss this project with the listening audience. It's been fun talking about reimagining the ways in which we use and occupy space in Cruz Bay Town, particularly, but all across St. John as well as the territory. So I'll start by talking about some of the cultural components of the Cruz Bay plan. And most of it evolves around the Cruz Bay Historic District. For those that do not know, the Cruz Bay Historic District was established in 2017, just before the hurricanes, and it became the fourth of our historic districts in the USVI at large. And the unique thing about the Cruz Bay Town, unlike Charlotte-Amalie, Christiansted, Frederiksted, which pay attention to a colonial framework and archetype, the Cruz Bay Town actually tracks really the past 100 years of development in Cruz Bay. So it's really focusing on the period of time where St. Johnians started to build and make space for themselves on their island and in their town. And so we coined the term neo-vernacular, or David Knight Sr. rather, who wrote the book on Cruz Bay and did the application for the Historic District registration, coined neo-vernacular to be the archetype that we discuss and try to enforce and celebrate in Cruz Bay Town. In this image, one of the premier examples you'll see is down to the left-hand corner of this image is the Sproul family property, which is currently it's currently damaged by Hurricanes Irma and Maria, but it's the recipient of historic preservation funds. And so it's in the process of being renovated as we speak. But the Cruz Bay Historic District is really sort of the major footprint for a lot of what we're talking about regarding resiliency, celebration of space and people, access and circulation and things like that. So we talk a lot about ideas about walkability, green space, vegetation, places to gather and connect, and how we move through space. And so a lot of what we've talked about has referenced the past. And so it's interesting that we talk about preservation and we think about it being the means by which we try to hold on to things that are old. But I'd like to remind everyone that preservation is actually progress, because a lot of how we talk about the themes that we go over in the Cruz Bay plan sort of want to reclaim old ideas of how we use space. So more green space so that as water inundates inland areas, there's not hard pavement, rather there's green permeable surfaces where the water can be reclaimed by the earth. Green spaces also cast shade. People historically are used to a very green Cruz Bay waterfront where you can take a seat just about anywhere along the water's edge and pause. And so we talk a lot in this plan, this new plan, about reclaiming some of those old ideas of inhabiting spaces. We also talk a lot about reimagining the current or past function of some of these spaces. And so I know it's a very contentious area of discussion, but the Sprout School campus, for example, is going to be demolished, and it will be a free and clear open site. If you're not aware, the government of the Virgin Islands just finally approved or went through the last step of the process with the National Park Service to confer acreage in Catherine-Burg to build the new Julius Sprout pre-K through 12 campus. And so the current site of the school will be free and open for development. And so we've discussed the idea of that space being redeveloped as primarily government offices and services. And so with the redevelopment of that site, I know we're all attached to the ball field, but can we imagine a reality where that ball field, the Winston Wells ball field, isn't used in the same way as it has been historically used? Sports Parks and Recreation has a lease to the National Park Field. They've been doing quite a bit of community events on that space, and everyone seems to love it. So can we imagine the Winston Wells ball field being turned into some other type of space that services the community in a different way than we have in the past, especially because the primary use of that space was as a cultural incubator of sorts, so to speak. And with that, can we reimagine other spaces nearby being reused and redesigned to facilitate all these things as well? For example, the Virgin Islands Port Authority is currently designing plans for what could be considered the Central Park of St. John over in the gravel parking lot area. And the intent there is to move the Carnival Village. And so if we're imagining all of these neighboring spaces being redeveloped and reimagined, can we think about ways in which we might be able to step away from how we're used to these C&D spaces used and occupied? In addition to that, how can we reimagine just the total change in landscape in some of these spaces? So a lot of our lower lying areas in town suffer being inundated by water or flooding events in the event of a disaster. And so we've talked about expanding green space so that we see a Cruz Bay that's much more akin to a Cruz Bay of the past. But also, in addition to just that being a space that is more familiar, how then does that space function better for the community? And so we've talked about expanding the Powell Park area. And so can we imagine the taxi stand being moved as the ferry traffic is moved? Can we imagine that Powell Park area sort of cascading down to the water's edge? And so all of a sudden we have this new and beautiful experience where we move from green, lush park space down to a crystal clear blue waterfront. And it's not interrupted by taxi buses that are parked there or persons waiting for friends or family to get off the ferry. Rather, it becomes a very beautiful, comforting community space that we all can enjoy in a very, very different way. And I don't know about you all, but I think people should enjoy the waterfront, not vehicles. And so how can we imagine sort of reclaiming some of these spaces for people and for cultural access and activity? For example, we do music events in the park often. And so can we imagine having that much more public space to enjoy while we're in town for fairs or concerts and things like that. Again, the whole idea is that we're reclaiming these spaces and the ideas of how we use these spaces so that the people who are living in this community day to day have a much more enjoyable experience as we come and go. And inevitably, those that visit the space will enjoy it just as much more in the project. And so I think we're going to move on to the next set of the next topic, which is walkable public spaces.
That's right. Thank you, Kurt. So the next theme of the plan is to talk about making streets walkable public spaces. And, when we think about the design of towns and villages, the design of streets is really, one of the key things that makes them special. And, in Cruz Bay town today is a compact area. It's kind of nestled on the waterfront amongst the hillsides. And, it is roughly a 5-minute walk from the center to the edge. It's about a quarter mile, what people, would normally walk comfortably, but many of the streets today are not safe or inviting for people to walk. And so one of the big ideas for the plan is improving and prioritizing walkability in all areas of the town. And so I'll show a few examples of that. We think of really 5 basic features that create walkable streets, and that's making streets that are comfortable to walk on. They're shaped by buildings or trees. They're connected to each other, and then they feel safe, but they're also memorable spaces. And so these should be the priority and what's the norm for Cruz Bay. So here's an example, a specific street design idea in the plan, and that is reimagining Prince Street to be more safe and walkable. So today, I'm sure you all are very familiar with this narrow one-way street. It connects through the center of town to the passenger ferry dock. And it has both pedestrians and vehicles together. But we started to imagine how that could be improved. If you noticed, the utilities and power lines went underground in that image. And so that could be a near-term improvement that increases resiliency. Of course, power can be restored faster, if the power lines are underground, and it also reduces visual clutter. Starts to improve the public space. A next improvement that'll come on your screen here is an idea about making this street a curbless configuration. So you might close it down during certain hours, certain days of the week, and have this be a public gathering space. So you could have, special events and really, increase the walkability of this space. And then, finally, over time, as you make improvements to your public spaces and streets, they start to create great addresses where you might see some new infill development, coming and shaping those spaces. So again, just one of the ideas described in the report. Another one is Fish Fry Drive. We thought this was a good place to illustrate, how to improve the walking experience, coming, into the center of town, and an opportunity to go from less gray space and more green space. So more trees, more planters, and getting sidewalks within the street space, as well as within the front setbacks of new buildings. You can see the existing picture and then the what if image, showing some of those walkability strategies. So again, this is an example on Fish Fry Drive, but this could apply to a number of streets throughout town. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John to talk about mobility.
All right. Thank you, Amy. I'm John Ford. I'm a civil engineer with Horsley Witten, part of the team here. And mobility is interesting, as Margaret especially, I think, said. Getting around town, it's so central to the success of Cruz Bay Town and people's connection to Cruz Bay Town as a place and its economic success for visitors and residents alike. We heard a lot about the challenges of congestion, especially at the waterfront. And in order to achieve the vision, which is really the flip side of the challenge, is such opportunity to return to a walkable, well-connected place, having a series of steps to get there is really critically important for a walkable Cruz Bay Town. And so the vision of creating a pedestrian-first walkable environment, enhancing the waterfront, really requires a comprehensive look at how people get around, how people get to Cruz Bay town, how people move around within Cruz Bay town, and maybe different ways that future investments, whether they be the redevelopment of properties, or public or private, or street improvements or drainage improvements or resiliency improvements that are really aligned with the future vision for people to enjoy these beautiful spaces. And so the series of steps that we've really translated from what we heard from you all were to, you've seen the vision for a walkable, a place where people, not vehicles, are enjoying the waterfront. And that really doesn't need to be done all at once. We really envision a series of steps that build upon the momentum that already exists. So an expanded arrivals area that could be temporary, kind of building upon the festivals and music that happens at the waterfront area in Powell Park, that could be slightly expanded, that could include a temporary closure of Prince Street as long as there's a way for emergency vehicles and deliveries to get through. This is building on something that's already happening. And if that could expand maybe to different times of day, or maybe it's every single weekend plus one day during the week to test it. It's easy to do, it's cheap, and you can see what's working and what's not. And as you move forward, and maybe as funding is available to expand the arrivals area, it's consistent with the future vision, kind of what Amy had shown, to pedestrianize Prince Street. It could be flushed, there could be money to underground utilities. It's consistent with the larger vision. Can be permeable pavement, for example, to help floodwaters and stormwater runoff get in the ground. Can be another connection to the battery, which is in line with the future vision. And then the next steps could keep building upon that momentum. Perhaps there's a way to reorganize the taxis. Maybe they still pick up and drop off and allow for vehicular flow through the pedestrian zone at the waterfront. But there's the addition of benches, there's the addition of vegetation and strong root structures to help as a buffer to storm surge and add for resiliency. And maybe there's funding there to help achieve multiple pieces of the vision: walkability, enjoying the waterfront, public spaces, and stormwater and resiliency, and shifting the taxi and drop-off zones towards the creek, where there's a little bit more space. And then the final vision could be the full build out, this what if in the future, where maybe the clinic is moved out of the flood zone, where it's kind of at risk from storm surge, and then the park can expand to provide more space for people and more space for a vegetated buffer. The taxi and pedestrian zone can be reorganized. A series of small steps towards the big picture vision and mobility, and in all things with the plan, so that investments can be aligned with the community's vision and what we heard. The next slide. So I mentioned conscious decisions about building in vulnerable areas. So Powell Park and expansion of the waterfront for people really aligns with that location being one of the more vulnerable spots to storm surge. So everything we can do to plant, to move vulnerable infrastructure out of that zone in the long term is a wise decision. And so that's, as getting into more future design and community implementing the plan, is something to keep in mind. And we'll be talking a little bit more about that this evening. So part of getting through town and arriving and coming and going to Cruz Bay town is finding other ways to get around. So every path connection we make where someone could walk is a car off the streets, and maybe a parking space that can be put in a consolidated, centralized location where it makes sense to do so. So we wandered, we heard from you all, and kind of dashed out a few places where it makes sense to formalize pedestrian connections. In some places they exist and could be better, such as Prince Street. There are opportunities for a small pond path, especially with the development of the Port Authority Park and parking at the current car barge location, there could be a way to kind of get around the hill and walk around the waterfront differently to get to Powell Park and the waterfront. There could be a stepped library path from the new Port Authority Park, that's the letter B on the plan here, up to the library. And as the municipal properties are built out, can they include parking and paths? They must include parking and paths that are aligned with the community vision kind of for a Park One strategy, which will be the next slide. Oh, and last but not least, a battery nature trail around the battery, which are some of the most beautiful views. And that's really public property that could be enjoyed and kind of woven into the pedestrian network. Centralized parking, we heard a lot of stress from folks, visitors, and residents alike. No residents told us your secret parking spaces, but we started to kind of figure them out as we were in town. It's a stressful thing, whether you kind of know where you're going or not, and any ability to add centralized parking in places where it makes sense along with future investments would be a huge improvement. And so, for example, redevelopment of the school site, whatever it becomes, could have parking on a lower level that could also align possibly with a relocated taxi stand, pickup and drop off, to help unlock the walkability of the waterfront. And possibly also the purple dash line there could be a trolley that kind of circulates through town that gets people from parking at the future park on Port Authority through town to the waterfront and back, to take all of those cars making the trip now out of the most congested locations within town. And so we heard a lot about the stress when the ferry, the pedestrian ferry arrives. We saw it, of course. And that being a stressful thing, that it's confusing. There are a lot of people in a small space. So in conjunction with the walkability improvements, future redevelopment, we looked at a couple alternatives for possibly reorganizing all of the different components of what happens at the waterfront, both at the current pedestrian ferry at the creek and also the current car barge location at the future park. So this requires a lot of future detailed thinking and design, but we do have a couple thoughts that kind of go along and lock in with other things in the plan. One alternative could be switching the passenger ferry to the current Customs Coast Guard operation site on the creek, which would align with the number 1 you see there. And that was part of the waterfront Powell Park vision for a shift in the taxi stand to a place that doesn't bring it all through, circulating through the waterfront. And that allows the customs building to be refurbished as passenger ferry terminal, taxi drop-off moving, car pickup, taxi staging kind of shifting over. And the private vessels and Coast Guard and public can be at their current pedestrian ferry. Another possible strategy would be to shift some of the passenger ferry arrivals to the current car barge location, especially with more parking and the park happening there. That would take some of the stress off the current pedestrian ferry, passenger ferry arrival location. One thing we heard a lot from the community about, and just want to make sure that we all together keep in mind is, the passenger ferry arrivals kind of are central to the history and just the vitality of the waterfront and Powell Park in that location. So finding a way to balance that kind of active pedestrian arrival with the congestion really will take a deep thinking and making sure it's connected through all the elements of the plan, which is really why this plan is especially important.
Okay, so on to the 4th theme of the plan, which was to redevelop government property to serve community needs. You all might remember this map. I'll bring it on here, that has the government-owned parcels in beige, and you can see the Port Authority parcels in purple. So there, is quite a bit of government-owned property within the study area, and so the idea is that these could be repurposed, reused to accommodate a mix of uses. And what we heard a lot about during the charrette was that those uses should help to have more things done in town and alleviate some of the needs for trips to St. Thomas for all of the needs of life in St. John. And so again, thinking about how can these sites, as they are reused, be reused to help further the community vision. So an example that was discussed was the clinic site. As John was mentioning in his section, that potentially that could be relocated, and you can see just the amount of land here potentially to another site just further uphill out of the very vulnerable waterfront area. Some of the bigger sites we did study in greater detail. So we looked at alternatives for the Jess School site, knowing that as the school is relocated and rebuilt elsewhere, that this property is going to need a new future vision. And so the vision that we heard from the community is one that includes a mix of uses and civic activity. And we drew up a couple of different configurations that we would like to get feedback through the survey at the end of the night here. One's to know which you all like or don't like. So I'm going to run through those now. The three options in the plan, the elements can be fit interchangeably. And the idea is just to have redevelopment be a thoughtful and inclusive redevelopment that focuses on serving the needs of residents of Cruz Bay. So here's those existing conditions, and then this is scenario one. We're calling scenario one, restore the ball field. So again, it's rebuilding that ball field. The idea is potentially that could be over a level of parking built into the topography, and then including some new buildings around the edge of the site. You can see here for housing, for shops, for government services, and the idea is that these buildings could frame, pedestrian sidewalks and, be connected into the fabric of town. Scenario two includes a smaller community gathering space, so still allowing for gathering to happen at this site, but utilizing more of the site for development. And this would allow an above ground parking structure. You can see here 2 levels of parking lined by buildings that again have that mix of uses. So government services, shops, housing, all could be accommodated on this site potentially in the future. And then finally, a last alternative looks at still having a community gathering space, but moving it downhill to Hill Street. And so this would allow more buildings in the foreground of this image, in a courtyard space. Again, there might be parking underground, helping with the, to one of those, consolidated parking locations that John mentioned. We think this site is a key opportunity for that. So here you can see all three together. And again, there's much more detail about each of these in the report online. So would love to hear from those here tonight or those who watch this video later, what your thoughts are. But again, the big ideas are consistent throughout, that that this site could be reused for a mix of uses, community serving uses, and including a community gathering space in each option. Another design study was done for the property on the waterfront near North Shore Road. North Shore Road today is a central vehicular and pedestrian connection through town, but in the current configuration, there's not a lot of pedestrian infrastructure. But we did see when we were there, a lot of people do walk anyway because the demand is there. And so we're thinking about how could that street space be improved in the future, along with the redevelopment and reuse of property in this area. And the property is owned by the Port Authority and the government, and as well as private property in the lumberyard site above. And so the design study, thinks about all three of these together. And so what we're seeing here is the improvements to the Port Authority site, which could include providing public access to the waterfront by removing the fence, considering the location of a new fish market and public gathering space, but as well as continuing important boat and marina services like U.S. Customs, Coast Guard, and the ambulance boat. So I think those details could be worked out in a way that the site could be, reused to include more public spaces. Then again, you see on North Shore Road, creating a more pedestrian-friendly street frontage with street trees, narrowing down the travel lanes, getting a sidewalk in there. On the parcel that's on the other side of the road, we have vendor stalls with parking built under an elevated plaza space. So the idea of getting parking and shops all on that site. And then the idea is that that all could connect with new development on the lumberyard site above, which could, have a mix of housing, office space, and parking all above. And, some questions about, rebuilding in this site. It is a vulnerable site for future storms. And so, any future building here could address this, having either floodable ground floor areas or raised finished floors. So again, that'll be an important detail, but there's a number of design tools, ways of building back and thinking about resiliency. One last site I wanted to talk about is the site of the library on the hilltop. It's one of the most iconic buildings in towns with great views of Cruz Bay, and the strategies in the plan think about how the pedestrian connections to the library could be improved. There could be a plaza space out front for community gatherings, as well as steps down to Enid Pond and the new park and public space that's being planned there. So again, just thinking about how these publicly owned spaces could be repurposed, reused, as the time comes for improvements to meet some of the goals of the plan. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellen to talk about the last theme of our plan.
So create a restorative, resilient Cruz Bay town. We heard about the history of a green Cruz Bay, so we thought the first thing is more green and less gray. We also heard about the importance of water and with flooding or how it flows over the land. So looking to propose techniques to handle flooding and the natural flow that will blend in with the downtown. And then also consideration for making decisions about building within the vulnerable areas. So the map you see in front of you is for the existing conditions for downtown, for the green highlighting where there's existing canopy. As you can see, there's large areas where there just isn't any, which will make the spaces quite a bit hotter and have water running off of there. What we would be looking to propose with the new conditions is new canopy and street trees incorporated into the downtown and streetscape. So these don't have to change what the function is of the space, but just makes it more comfortable. It makes it more shaded for people and shading the paved surfaces to keep it cooler. The increase in canopy makes the streets more green and comfortable. And it's been shown that having more green, including street trees, can improve mental health. And then a big bonus for these is that they can help absorb and soak up stormwater during flooding times too. So when considering water in the downtown, we want to make sure that all of these techniques are blending in with the many things that the downtown is doing with people, transportation, buildings. So there's a few different ways that we could do that. We've been calling a toolkit, but this map in front of you goes over some of the existing conditions. So with the lighter blue in the background, with the dashed thick blue line is kind of where a ridge is, and then the larger arrows showing where water is flowing down from each of these. And then placing some of these tools in specific locations where we can capture a lot of this water and help it soak in, or even give it places to store it. So where there's this orange color below would be where pervious pavement can be located. That could also be incorporated with some of the circulation improvements or pedestrian improvements that were covered earlier. That can help soak water into the ground, but then incorporate some other areas into the street. So here's just a sample of a toolkit that we have with the plan for a few different things that could be used, and these could be adjusted depending on the size of the site to be something a little bit larger or smaller. Just several different ways that these can be incorporated into downtown. So we can look at a few of them a little bit closer with the next slide. So for a tree filter pit, where we're proposing a lot of those canopy trees, this could be incorporated into the street design to take water off of the road, send it into a reservoir underneath that could have a storage for the water, but it could also help the trees grow. And then porous pavement So incorporated into some of these pedestrian improvements or in many other locations, as we'll see next, will help the water absorb into the ground, go into a reservoir where it falls and doesn't need to be stored. And then underground infiltration could be in specific locations that capture quite a bit of water, but could still have above it as a usable space, so that we're having many functions within a very tight area, and it might even be hard to tell that there is water being stored underneath. So this is just a sample for how these practices can look quite a few different ways and can be designed to blend in with the context, especially with porous pavement, which is shown in all of these images, where it could be a type of stone, a paver, or it could even look like asphalt, but all of them do the same thing of letting water absorb into the ground. And then another major consideration that was brought up for resilient downtown is, of course, making conscious decisions about building in vulnerable areas. So the maps on the right, as we pointed out, could be frequently flooded or areas that are at risk for sea level rise. But we also know these are have important significance with everything in the main heart of downtown. So as we move forward, considering similar with the type of toolkit on the right, for different ways that we build in this areas, and then also how we could look at greening the coasts, and if there's ways that we can incorporate more vegetation to make these edges more resilient as we're moving forward too. And with that, I think I'm giving it back to Margaret.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you, John and Amy and Kurt. Thank you for that overview of our common themes and plan recommendations. I think it's very interesting as you start to dive deeper into each of these themes, how intricate and detailed they are, but also how much overlap there is amongst the themes. It's not just sort of a one set plan, but it's basically opportunities for all of these various components to come together to create a more complete Cruz Bay, but that still reflects the character and culture of community that the St. John residents value and treasure. As far as implementation goes, there is a chapter in the report with regards to implementation. And I'm very glad to see on our conversation this evening some familiar names that have been participating all along with us, from Liz and Mandy and Ronnie and many others. And we're grateful for you all that have participated in this hands-on interactive planning process, because partnerships and coordination are essential to implementation. So one of the biggest players in implementation is the government of the Virgin Islands. And so there's various departments within the GVI that we'll be continuing conversations with to look towards implementation, sort of how we have also worked in St. Thomas with Veterans Drive in the area there. But anywhere from property and procurement to DPNR, public works, schools, and historic preservation. As Kurt mentioned, we are very fortunate that Cruz Bay is one of the 4 historic districts in the USVI. The Port Authority plays an important role as well with regards to the property in Cruz Bay, as well as the future park development or the park amenity that they would be placing near the pond, and how to connect that in with the overall town. Love City Strong and other nonprofit and community partners to help to lead the charge, as well as, of course, St. John residents. And so you all play an extremely important role, because as we've been sharing this evening and how we started with this plan, is the idea is to create a plan by the community for the community. And so what we want to do is to hear from you all to make sure we're getting the details right, and that this is representative of what you all want to see for the future of your town. In doing so, we encourage you to become advocates and ombudsmen for the plan and to help to move it towards implementation. There could be some small low-hanging fruit, some small steps, anywhere from more larger infrastructure and government sponsored and funded projects, especially with regards to the government properties. So I very much encourage all of you to stay involved. And I think that's part of what makes St. John so unique and special, is the involvement of the community. So on the next slide, Amy, you're going to see this is sort of what the implementation matrix looks like. And so what we've set up is taking each of the common themes and each of the getting there steps and looking at a time frame as to what could happen near term, midterm, and then long term, and as well as looking at the responsible party and partners. And so we've started to list out different agencies and different groups that could help with implementation of each of these strategies. So I encourage you to take a look when you visit plancruzbay.com, and you can take a closer look at the implementation strategies. But it's going to take a considerable open lines of communication and partnerships and coordination. As we conclude our presentation this evening, we'd like to also talk about some next steps. So we're grateful for your participation throughout the process. And as I've said, plancruzbay.com. This is an extension of the Love City Strong website. This is a website dedicated solely to this project. And so this is sort of a place where you're going to find all your resources, all your documents, photos from the various events, many of the planned illustrations that the team shared tonight. I encourage you to take a look and spend some time on plancruzbay.com, share it with your friends, and kind of take a look back at the process as well as the plan recommendations. You'll have access there to view the plan, and this is it's a very visual document, a lot of images, a lot of great local prototypes, and just sort of descriptions of the various concepts that we've described tonight. This is also extremely important. So to provide feedback, in addition to, if you have any questions, you're welcome to place them in the Q&A this evening or the chat, and we can answer them in a moment. But what we also have on the website, if you go to the website and you can click under view the plan, you could go down to survey, or you can type in the URL at the bottom of the screen you see here. Or if you take a minute and take your smartphone and you scan that QR code, it'll take you to the survey page. There's also a link to the survey in the chat right now. And so basically what the survey offers is it goes through, again, each of the concepts. So here's an example. And we want to hear from you. Did we get it right? Is this important to you? Do you like this idea? Do you support this idea? Because what we need to hear is from the community. We want to know if it's something you support, this can be something that we work together to push forward with the government and other leaders and community groups to make some of these ideas a reality. So it's important to take the time. The survey will be open for several days following this presentation, and as well as this presentation will be available on the website, the recording. So I strongly encourage, and I hope that you'll take the time to provide us that feedback. It's just a couple clicks, but it's really helpful to us to know your thoughts on each of the plan concepts and ideas. Share with your friends. It's real important to get the word out. And like so many of you all have been doing on social media and other outlets, we're grateful for that as planners, because you all are the ones that know best your community, your relationships, your friends, your relatives, your neighbors. And so encourage them to get involved and just be aware, and to also share their input and feedback on the plan also. I'd like to take a moment before we move into question and answer. I'd like to invite Nate Kelly to share a little bit about the update on the comprehensive plan that is also happening simultaneously with Plan Cruz Bay. Nate, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Margaret. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, just a couple of slides here, folks, as a reminder of the larger effort that's going on with the comp plan. The full name, the Comprehensive Land and Water Use Plan, but everybody's sort of shortened that to the comp plan. And you can access information on this plan at planusvi.com. And so this work that you're doing tonight in this plan for Cruz Bay, you know, has power and standing on its own, but it also will serve to be a vital component of this larger comp plan. And so, you know, just as a rehash of where we've been working on the comp plan for a year now, over a year now, and we published our baseline reports, which is really just that existing conditions. But again, this plan covers a lot of ground, literally and metaphorically. So there's housing and transportation and economic development and cultural resources and climate change and all of those elements that you see play out to a certain degree in Cruz Bay, but we're looking at this across the entire territory. So there's a lot of information there brought together, reading well over 50 documents that preceded our effort. We did a lot of work up until July of 2023, really just doing a lot of listening and a lot of town hall and small group meetings to get to those values, the kinds of things that Margaret and other speakers tonight talked about specific to Cruz Bay, We were on all three of the major islands talking about, community values and what was important to everybody across the entire territory. And then in November, this same team came together and we did something similar to what you saw today in Cruz Bay, but just on a much more sort of concise, quick strike kind of approach, where we looked at different places on all three of the major islands, including St. John, and we did small visualization exercises just to see, you folks have been talking about walkability, you've been talking about housing that's more affordable. Well, what would that look like on the ground? So again, our folks from Dover Cole, who have this great talent for sort of visualizing these things, we got to see how that would play out on the ground. And the results of those, for any of you who are involved in those discussions, are going to be posted next week on our website, if not sooner. So you'll get to see the sketches that came out of that for different places like Coral Bay and up near the Myra Keating Clinic, that area of the island, to think about, again, different futures, like Kurt was talking about. How can we, sort of visualize a different future for these areas? What would that look like, given the different opportunities and challenges that they face? So with that work in place and going to be posted on our website, we're really starting to draft the plan now. So again, next week, another thing that we're going to post up on the website are these policy previews, that, as we're calling them, are sort of really concise one-page summaries. We have 14 of them drafted at this point, and there'll likely be more because, like I said, we're covering a lot of different topics on this. But we're really digging into things like decision making, for example. Who is granting variances? Who is granting zone changes? That, as an example, and could that authority change in a way that better serves the people of the U.S. Virgin Islands? Permitting standards for environmental protection, for walkability. How do we elevate our history and culture and how we think about land and water use? How can we reorient tourism in a way that's less extractive and more giving and more in line with what U.S. Virgin Island residents and artists and historians and restaurateurs, what they bring forward? How can we reorient tourism to celebrate that? I talked briefly about creating housing that's more affordable to folks on the Virgin Islands. It's nearly impossible for people to find places to live that they can afford. Food sovereignty, the idea that Virgin Islanders can feed themselves with food that's culturally appropriate, things that they want to eat, and have that as a sort of a ready supply across the entire territory. We're leaning on the agricultural plan that was recently developed for a lot of those ideas and policies, but there's certainly more to it than just agriculture. Ideas about the bays. How do we use our different bays? How do we plan for that, regulate that, enforce? The ideas of parks. We talked about parks with Cruz Bay, but folks all over the three islands have talked about how their neighborhoods, for example, may not have a park where their kids or anybody can walk to safely. So if they want to go out to a park, they have to leave their neighborhood, which is not always the safest way to do if you're on foot or trying to get around on a bike. So these are examples of some of the things that you'll see on the website next week. There's more to it than that, but the drafting has begun. So over the course of the next several months, we'll be developing a lot of material for folks to review, and there'll be many opportunities to do that, so stay tuned.
Thank you for that update, Nate. That the strengths of the comp plan fit very nicely with the objectives of Plan Cruz Bay, and the two together can, we're very fortunate to have the comp plan happening at the same time, as well as the plan recommendations for Plan Cruz Bay. They fit nicely together. So as for next steps, as we said, to review the report, you can flip through it on the website as well as download a PDF copy if you would like. Take the survey, please. The survey's in our chat right now, and it'll also be posted on the website. You can find it there. and that'll give us feedback directed to each of the common themes and the various design concepts and approaches that our team has shared this evening. Refinements, as you may have noticed, and we probably should have stressed it even more, that each of the images and illustrations was marked draft. So I want you to keep in mind, this is a draft report. You also see the word draft on every page of the report. So we're still evolving this process and want to make sure that we're getting your input as well. Additional input, of course, you're more than welcome to share on the website or to contact Megan and write directly at Love City Strong. She'd be more than happy to chat with you as well. So these are our next steps, and we're grateful for the opportunity to work with the community. We look forward to hearing what you think about the various ideas, and we hope that this is a resemblance of what you've shared with us over the past 6 months, as well as hoping to work together to create this one voice, one vision for the future of Cruz Bay. If there's any questions, you're welcome to place them in the Q&A. We're grateful for your participation and attendance this evening. We did get some questions earlier as we began. The first one, and you can also see them here in the Q&A, but how did your group come together? I went ahead and wrote a quick response back regarding that and our experience, but Megan, I wasn't sure if you'd like to share anything more with regards to the work that Love City Strong's been doing with regards to recovering resiliency and how we all came to work together on this important plan.
Yeah, thank you. I think over the last 6 years, it's become really clear that there are some major gaps in the recovery on St. John, including permitting and planning. And it became clear to us that there had never been a plan for Cruz Bay. And I think that the development in town over the last, 20 to 30 years is a real indicator of what happens when there is no plan. And so when we started to think about what it would look like to do a charrette, we knew we wanted to have a professional team to guide the process to make sure that we were doing it right. And given the timing of the comprehensive land and water use plan in the territory, it also made sense to us to use that team if possible, so that our plan and the territory plan could dovetail together as nicely as possible. The advantage being that we got to work with Horsley Witten and Dover Cole and of course Kurt. So it's a really kind of perfect storm of excellent skill sets brought to the table. But it was a priority of ours to make sure that in no way was this process stepping on the toes of the comp plan, and also that we were considering and availing ourselves of the same resources and information so that we weren't duplicating efforts. And actually, while we're sort of in the Q&As that got answered, I just want to add something to Karen's other question, which is who makes the final call on the plan, how is it executed, and how is it funded? And I know that Kurt put some great answers in the Q&A chat there. But also I just wanted to emphasize that there's a whole slew of benefits to having a plan. The Jess site is a perfect example. That is probably the largest parcel of government-owned land that will be redeveloped in Cruz Bay. Once the public school is rebuilt and moved outside of town, that property will likely go out for bid. And in the absence of a community plan, developers can bid on whatever they want. They could suggest anything they wanted for that property. So we think it's really important that the community has a vision for the types of things they would like to see in Cruz Bay, so that when bids are going out, they're going out in alignment with what the community wants to see. It's not necessarily we're putting a bid out for you to build this thing, but we are putting a bid out for you to build something that aligns with the vision that the community has presented. And I think, as I said, we've seen the other side of the coin where there's no restriction on how things are developed. And what we've ended up with is a Cruz Bay that does not really speak to community needs anymore. And so moving forward, we'd like to take the opportunity to sort of flip that on its head and move back towards, a resident-centered focus for Cruz Bay. When it comes to funding and individual projects moving forward, I think it's also really important to remember that there's a whole scale of sizes of projects and types of projects. And so while some of them might be much larger and really rooted in a single government department, like Port Authority with the waterfront example, there's also things that are a lot smaller and would be great sort of introductory or like opening stage projects for the implementation of Plan Cruz Bay. You know, something like the nature trail around the Battery feels like a really attainable project goal, or the regreening of Cruz Bay, right? Planting trees and making progress on that kind of a goal is much more iterative, and you can really kind of take it a little bit at a time. And so we encourage everyone to sort of look at this plan as an opportunity, and that yes, we focused on the government property because we feel really strongly that there's a ton of underutilized and unused government property that could be much more effectively allocated. But also, anyone who's developing in Cruz Bay, I think, can benefit from the themes that are identified in the plan here and from thinking consciously about how we're developing Cruz Bay in the future.
Thank you, Megan. That was a wonderful summary, and it really does help to tie it all together with regards to implementation and community activity and planning for the near and the long term, while protecting and preserving that community character that is so essential to the livelihood of Cruz Bay. Once again, plancruzbay.com is where you can find the report, as well as a wealth of information with regards to the various plan concepts. I encourage you to take a look at those and take a closer look and really think about them, just like Megan was just saying. And by having a plan in place, it does show that community opportunity to come together and to have one voice. And so when opportunities for redevelopment or streetscape improvements or various things, that there is a plan in place that helps to guide and give direction and really shows what the community would like to see in the future. We've seen you all come together in numerous events, good times and bad, and the Cruz Bay and the overall St. John community is truly special, and we want this plan and the future improvements and implementation strategy to reflect and respect that.
I think we have some closing remarks from Ian.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Ian Samuel, are you on? Board member of Love City Strong and amazing community member.
This has been incredible. I want to thank you guys again for all the hard work in putting this together. Kurt, Megan, and all the folks that have lived on St. John understand how important this is. For us as a community, this gives us the opportunity to create a voice and to create a want and a need that we expect from our government and from our leaders, and also gives us the ability to hold them accountable in hearing us. So, again, in living here for as long as I have, we have never had this opportunity to come together as a community and share our thoughts and create a cumulative idea of what we as a people of St. John would like to see in the future. And again, a lot of times people focus on how we're going to pay for this, how are you going to do this? Right now, we don't know how we're going to pay for it. Like you said, but we can't wait until an opportunity comes for us to understand what we want. So if we establish what we want, when the money becomes available, we already have a plan in place to spend it or to allocate it. And I think that goes a long way in holding our leaders accountable and doing what we the people want. So again, thank you so much for coming in and giving us the wind beneath our sails to be a community and be able to create a voice that we can hear, and a voice that can be heard. This is just the beginning, by the way. So we have a lot of work to do as a group. And again, I'm glad this is being recorded so that people can play it back and really get the facts of what Plan Cruz Bay is about. Again, this gives us the opportunity to say, hey, look, we met together as a community, we shared our ideas, and based on what we shared, this is what we came up with. This is what we'd like to see as a community. Some people may agree, some people may not, but at the end of the day, it's what we want as a community. And we have that driving force that allows us to be a community and again, hold people accountable. So I'm excited. Thank you. It's coming together well. And I look forward to, down the road, when these things happen and start to be executed, that we can look back at this time and say, you know what, I remember when I participated in that event. So I'm excited and I'm looking forward to all of the great things that are going to come from this. And I think we're on the right track. So let's keep it going.
Wonderful, Ian. Thank you very much for those kind words and those inspiring words. It really is an incredible moment in the history of Cruz Bay that we're all being a part of right now. And so thank you all again for participating. We're grateful for that, as well as taking the time to complete the survey to give us your feedback. So thank you very much for attending this evening, and we look forward to hearing from you. Have a wonderful night.